Hey y'all, this is Lori Kraft with the Kraft team in Next Home Realty Center, and I am bringing you a Tuesday tip on this absolutely beautiful Christmas week. So I hope many of you have gotten to take time off and you're enjoying time with your families. I'm working, which a lot of realtors are crazy busy this time of year. So if you have a friend that's a realtor, you might want to give her some cookies or maybe some adult beverages. I'm sure they would appreciate those. Well, I wanted to share a tip with you today that came from real life experiences. Quite honestly, 99% of my tips come from things that have happened the week that I do the tip. And in this case, it's about doing for sale by owner or buying a for sale by owner. And I think there are reasons why people want to do for sale by owner. First of all, the main one is because they feel like it saves them that money on commissions. And I think that if you talk to anybody that's in real estate or that has sold for sale by owner, there are huge swings in the success of that. Some people who have sold homes before or have some history with real estate usually do okay. We know from research that generally speaking, even with those realtor fees factored in, you generally do better financially if you have a realtor involved. It's just kind of how it is, and you can look up all that data yourself. You don't have to believe me. But here are some of the things I want you to consider from both the selling side and the buying side when you choose to go for sale by owner. First of all, Mr. Seller, when you're listing your house, you need to make sure that if you're doing it for sale by owner, that you have the most current TREC forms. You need to make sure that all the language is accurate and that you've protected yourself. You want to make sure that you've completed a recent seller's disclosure. And again, it needs to be a promulgated contract that has been approved. So it's legal. And you need to make sure it's the most recent one, because if it's not the most recent one, you can run into problems. And you want to make sure that you disclose as much as you possibly can so that it doesn't come back and bite you later. If something were to come up and a buyer, let's say they've already bought the home, they're 3 months down the road, and they discover that there was a material defect that you did not disclose and that they have any way of showing that you knew about this and chose not to disclose it, they can actually sue you for triple damages. That's an attorney question, and I will leave that to my friends in the legal profession, but I would say be very, very cautious with that seller's disclosure and make sure that you're very honest about it. There are lots of things that you also need to know about. You need to know about your survey. You need to know about a T47. You need to know how to negotiate out on repairs. A lot of times when people do for sale by owner, if they're not willing to pay for realtor fees, they certainly don't want to negotiate on repairs either, which means that, and I'll talk about this a little bit from the buy side, Mr. Seller, you're selling as is. And if you're selling as is, that may be a deterrent to buyers. Here's some of the benefits I'll tell you. And I know I probably shouldn't as a realtor, but I think that you should know there's some benefits. First of all, obviously you're saving some commissions. The other thing is that by not going on MLS, and most of you will not, simply because it costs extra, you have to follow the MLS rules. And if you're not familiar with them, you can violate them very easily and get into trouble that way. And you don't want to do that. So if you're selling it, what I would call off market, to somebody you know or somebody's friend or whatever, and you do all the dealing off MLS, then let's say that the deal falls apart and you decide, I can't deal with this. This is too much stress. I want to go ahead and get a realtor to manage this. And the realtor takes over. When you go on MLS, you're going on in day one. It's like that other transaction never really happened. Now, one thing that can get you, and you need to be aware of it, is if there is an inspection report. You have to disclose that inspection report. You can't keep that to yourself and pretend like that didn't happen. If it's shared, then it's shareable. So make sure that you know that going in. And you can't refuse it either. I mean, you could, but that's a little shady, and I don't think you'd want to do that because you want to know what's going on with your property. It's just not a good idea to try to turn a blind eye, because if somebody found a defect, the next guy down the road is going to find a defect. So just keep that in mind too. Another benefit is you control the showings. You have all control over that. So you can decide, I'm only going to show from 2 to 4 on Tuesdays and Fridays. is that a good idea? Probably not. But in all likelihood, if you're going for sale by owner, it's in a very hot, fast-moving market, and you know that there are going to be a lineup of people ready to buy your house anyway. So you may only be showing to those particular people in a time that works for you. The other thing that I would say is, unlike in a normal market or unlike with a realtor, you have direct line and direct contact with that buyer. So there's nothing to get in the way of that, nothing to buffer it. So why doesn't everybody do for sale by owner? Well, there's a lot of reasons. And I named the first one, which is in many cases, you don't make as much money. But it can feel like you're making more money, but you're probably not. Have somebody run those numbers for you so you can see that. The other thing is you don't know all the nuances. There's 99 things that can go wrong in a transaction. And I hope for all that is holy that your transaction doesn't have any of them. But the likelihood is they will. Realtors manage difficult situations all the time, and we drink the Pepto-Bismol and we're having a cocktail lunch to get through that drama because we don't want you to have to, the buyer or the seller, to have to deal with that drama. We just sort of absorb it. The only time we get you involved is if we have to. And at that point, then there really is a very big problem, and it's not something that we can just make go away. But as a seller, you would be absorbing all of that. And then let's say that their complications do arise. Do you have an attorney that you can turn to and say, look at these documents. I've got concerns about what I'm signing. That brings another issue. Do you know what you're signing? Do you have access to the right forms? Have you just gone to LegalZoom and don't even get me started on that. But that's a very bad idea. You should have some kind of legal advice if you're trying to do all this by yourself. Now, most of the time you're not going to have a problem. But what if you're the guy that does and you end up in court? Is it worth it? Especially if you're not really saving money. I don't know. That's something that you really have to, think about and digest for yourself. But there are a lot of forms. There's a lot of legalese. This is an area that you need some supervision on. If you're not using a licensed realtor, I would recommend you at least consult with an attorney to make sure that everything is buttoned up. You also are going to have to manage your own showings. You're going to have to manage, what if the guy shows up with he and his family and all his kids and then they don't want to wear a mask? What do you do? How do you manage that? Because that would be a situation normally managed by a realtor. What if the guy that comes in your house and you show the house and your wife is sick and you think she just has a cold, but she has COVID and she pops positive for COVID? What's your liability? That's something that we as realtors work out. We have a plan for it. We know how to approach that kind of situation. Are you allowing people into your home right now? Or are you going to do everything virtually? If you do it virtually, are you going to be able to show all of the house? Do you know how to do that? If you're going to try to go ahead and spend that extra money and put it on MLS and try to navigate those waters, are you going to pay someone to take professional pictures? Or are you going to be the guy they make fun of on all of the Facebook pages with the really shadowy pictures or the accidental picture of your kid in bed playing his iPod? Or are you going to be the one that gets the picture of yourself in the mirror, half naked? Because we have those. So those are all things to think about. What about open houses? Are you going to do that? Are you going to put a sign in your yard? Is this going to be a public sale? Is this going to be something you do behind the scenes? All of those things are things you really need to consider. And like I said, 99 problems that can go wrong, and you don't want to have one. So consider those things. Mr. Buyer, here's my concern for you. Oh, and I skipped a piece, but I'll kind of wrap it up with the buyer side. So if you're going to buy for sale by owner, you probably already have a contract with your realtor. We'll start with that side of it. And then I'm going to talk to you about if you don't have a realtor. So if you already have a contract with your realtor, you have already negotiated out their fee. Now in Texas, all fees are negotiable, whether people like to hear that or not, they are. And you have negotiated out a fee with them. Now, if the seller opts to pay for that buyer fee, and I will say that about 50% of the time, FSBOs, as we call for sale by owner, FSBOs will pay for your realtor fee. but not always. Sometimes they're not willing to pay anything. Sometimes they're willing to pay half. Sometimes they're willing to pay a portion. That is something that you would need to find out, because you're going to absorb that cost if they don't, because you've already got a contract with a realtor. And your realtor is going to do double duty on this one, I assure you, because now they're having to work both sides of the transaction without working both sides of the transaction. They have to walk a very fine line of representing you, but making sure that all the paperwork is buttoned up. And that is hard to do. So let's say you want to make an offer. Is your offer going to be as is? Is your offer reasonable? Is the house priced right? I have two types of FSBOs. I have the FSBO that prices way over market because they think their house is fabulous. And they have no idea what the comps say. They have no idea what an appraiser is going to say. And they don't care because they feel like they're in the catbird seat and they should be able to charge whatever they want for their house because it's that kind of market. So if you are buying that house, your negotiating power is this big. You're just not going to have it. Then what does your seller expect in terms of repairs? As a realtor, I ask that right up front. I say, Mr. Seller, what do you plan to do if things come up on inspection? Will you negotiate with us about that? I would say that 50% of the time, my FSBOs say no. I'm selling FSBO because I don't want to pay any fees. So your buyer wants repairs, and that's all on them to do. I'm not doing anything. The house is as it is, for the price it is, not negotiating out repairs, and I'm not negotiating the price. They can move it along if they don't like it. Another reason why FSBOs stay on market so long. But that's, as a buyer, you're absorbing that huge risk. Then you're also absorbing the risk of, does your seller really know what they're doing? What if the seller's halfway through the deal and then they decide they don't want to sell their house? That's happened. And they don't have anybody in their corner. So then if you really want this house, you've already invested money on earnest money. You've already invested money on repairs, or not, maybe not necessarily repairs, but inspections for sure. You've already invested time off market because you've invested in this house and all those other houses you liked are gone. So, and now Mr. Seller's decided he doesn't want to sell his house to you. You would have to go to court to either force performance, get your earnest money back, or move along down the road. Either way, it's a big mess. So those are things to consider. So that's just my little tip to you. Do I think FSBOs are always a bad idea? No. I think there's a lot of times when it's really not the worst thing ever. And if you feel comfortable, I've seen lawyers do it. You know, they're both attorneys, and attorneys sell real estate. I mean, they can. They feel like they know what they're doing. They've got access to all the documents. They sell one realtor to another. I mean, not one realtor to another. That happens too. But one lawyer to another, and it's all fine. So if you've got attorneys doing the deal, I think your risk there is really small. But if you've got your average Joe guy who doesn't really know about real estate and hasn't sold a property in 30, 40 years, they built this house in 1999, and now they're trying to sell it in 2020. That's a long time for not having done a real estate transaction to try to do it all by yourself. And if you're a first-time home buyer and you're trying to buy a FSBO, then the whole thing's fraught with peril. So I just want you to approach it with caution. It could be fantastic, and you might be able to get a really great deal on a really great house before anybody else even knows it exists. Or you might end up in court. So that is my Tuesday tip this beautiful Christmas week. Be careful, and certainly be safe out there in COVID. And I hope everyone enjoys a beautiful Christmas holiday with whatever family you've got to enjoy through our COVID 2020 Christmas. Merry Christmas, y'all.